This week we're exploring relations between Nigeria and India on the basis of the second India-Africa Academic Conference, which held during the past week. The discussions held at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs here in Lagos. And although trade is a driving force for most bilateral relations, India intends to broaden that to include issues such as climate change and nuclear energy. You'll want to stay tuned for the interview with the Indian High Commissioner, Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev. You're watching Diplomatic Channel on Channels Television. I am Amarachi Ubani. We get on with today's program after a quick check on the latest diplomatic headlines. There was a second of such conferences at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, talking about the India-Nigeria Academic Conference. Both India and Nigeria have a lot in common, and both sides seem very excited about the growing partnerships. And it's not the relations between India and Nigeria just started, it's that the academics are now part of the decision-making.
In terms of cooperation, we have a lot of ideas what we should be doing with this institute, and I suggested that we will be happy to welcome some scholars in Nigeria to come to India, spend time with us, few months and longer, and they can write monograph or papers. They will generate a lot of interest among my own scholars in India. I always find between Nigeria and India there is a great deal in common. You know, we may be geographically far off, but yours is a large country like India, the largest in Africa, just as India is largest in our part of the world, South Asia. Big population, very diverse, multi-religious, multicultural, multi-ethnic. To forge such societies together is itself a major challenge. And I think in last 50 years, both Nigeria and India have made considerable progress in that direction. There will be problems, but it is not an easy task.
Well, diplomatic relations between Nigeria and India date back to 1958, before Nigeria's independence. From historical and political connections, relations have come to rest on economic links. I discussed with India's High Commissioner to Nigeria, Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev, on his thoughts on the relations. Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Sachdev, for speaking with us on Diplomatic Channel. There's a lot of similarity between Nigeria and India, population, democratic governance, just to name a few. India used to be in the same level with Nigeria, where it could be described as developing or a third world country. When did the country decide to move up from this level to where it is now?
Thank you, and I'm very happy to be on your channel. You are absolutely right. There have always been and will continue to be a lot of similarities between India and Nigeria. While you are entitled to your opinion, I still believe that we have not pulled out of the rank of developing countries. We have achieved something, and there are sectors in India that are doing well, but we remain essentially a developing country. And I think Nigeria has been performing very robustly in economy and other domains, and both countries can learn from each other.
Well, one of the major driving forces for India's partnership with Africa is, of course, trade. We have a lot of Indian goods here in Nigeria, but how much of Nigeria is reflected in India?
India-Nigeria trade is doing fairly well. Last year, which in India concluded on 31st March 2011, the bilateral trade exceeded $13 billion according to Indian data. It was over $8 billion in Nigeria's favor. So we have a huge trade deficit with Nigeria. Trade is growing on both sides. Our exports to Nigeria are growing, and Nigerian exports to India are growing, both in quantity as well as in value. Diversification of Nigerian exports is an issue. I think it's safe to say that Nigerian exports overwhelmingly comprise of hydrocarbons. We are ready to take more from Nigeria. In fact, India needs $9 billion worth of palm oil because our cooking cannot be done without palm oil. And palm oil was actually introduced to the world in the Niger Delta. As you know, historically, it was European settlers who took it all over the world. And we would like very much to have substantive amount of palm oil from Nigeria, for example. And there could be other commodities, other products. We remain ready, and our market is open for Nigerian products. In fact, a couple of years ago, when Nigerians for the first time put up a stall at India International Trade Fair, Nigerian shea butter and cocoa was a runaway hit. So you know the market exists.
Partnerships between India and Africa are broadening now to include climate change and, of course, the development of nuclear energy. India just signed a pact with the US recently on nuclear energy. Do you think Africa is ready to take this step?
It's a complex technology. It's riddled with various frightening possibilities, as Fukuyama last year showed. We just had an anniversary earlier this week of such a mammoth disaster. Although the circumstances were exceptional, a tsunami followed by a sea storm, an earthquake, but one has to be careful. I note that Nigeria has plans for nuclear power, and we wish them all the best.
Well, terrorism is another similarity. India has had its fair share of terrorist attacks. You're well aware of trans-border terrorism with your neighbors. Here in Nigeria, we're coming to grips with terrorism. We actually have a group right now that's terrorizing the whole country. India has seemed to manage its own situation quite well. What advice can you give Nigeria in this regard?
I think Nigeria and India have similarities in the context of this problem. Unfortunately, India has been the third largest victim of terrorism over past few decades. That has enabled us to get some information, some experience in tackling this malaise. Where our experience is relevant is how to contain and reverse terrorist influence without abandoning democratic freedoms, pluralism, and proportionality. At no point while terrorism was being tackled in India did we have martial law or had special undemocratic provisions. So we believe that it's a battle of both hearts and minds, and it is very important to convey to the man in the street in terrorist affected areas that government is on his side and government is not the enemy. It's the terrorists who are enemies. Their agenda is against the common man in terms of instability, in terms of economic dislocation, in terms of schools, shops, societal interactions being closed and being put on a wobbly note. Government should behave as the government is prone to, not overreact, be predictable, and be in command. Government should not speak with various voices, which can confuse the citizen. There should be an assiduous attempt to carve out a consensus of the country against terrorism, for example. However, there are differences in situation as well, and we believe that Nigeria has been able to evolve a strategy, a comprehensive strategy to combat terrorism, combat alienation of minorities, and this is a very good thing to happen.
Well, you spent a while in Nigeria already. You're well aware of the situation that we're dealing with when it comes to security. Some Indians, unfortunately, have become victims of some violent attacks, the one in Kano especially. Our condolences here. But how does the Indian community survive in the middle of this?
We have been in Nigeria for over 100 years. If you recall, ma'am, a couple of years ago, the oldest Indian concern in Nigeria, Chandrai Group, I should say, celebrated their 100th anniversary of corporatization in Lagos. So Indians intermingle with Nigerians in various parts of Nigeria. We have a low-key existence. Almost no Indian is involved in politics of domestic nature in Nigeria. We are largely honorable people who have done, at least tried to do, the society a lot of good. Taken together, I believe Indian community in Nigeria, which is only around 35,000 strong, is the largest employer in the private sector of Nigerians. An IIT, for example, is an IT training company from India. Every year, it trains around 25,000 Nigerians in IT skills, and none of them stays unemployed. So it's creating 25,000 additional jobs annually. Indian hospitals have been treating Nigerians in Nigeria and outside. Tulsi Chandrai Foundation, for example, has provided over past 2.5 decades free cataract operations to more than 70,000 Nigerians. All these go to show that Indians take pride in being good residents of Nigeria, and they have a positive agenda. With these attributes, I believe Indians are welcome by and large in every segment, every part of Nigeria. There are families that have lived for 5 generations in this country. They speak local languages as mother tongues. There are Indian women married to Nigerians, and vice versa. And this melange of coexistence goes on to show that two societies are compatible. Our low profile, our distance from controversies, our unwillingness to get involved in domestic politics helps us to stay out of the domestic fracas and problems. And I believe those incidents in Kanu, for example, which led to, over the last 3 months, deaths of 2 Indian nationals and injury to 6, were collateral to what was going on. I don't believe that Indians were targeted per se.
Well, you've been a while in Nigeria. You're High Commissioner to Nigeria, but you're also Ambassador to Benin Republic, you're Ambassador to Cameroon, you're also Ambassador to Chad. How do you juggle your role between these countries?
That's a good question. I often ask myself as well. Nigeria itself is a huge responsibility. But other 3 countries do provide their own cost-benefit analysis and rationale. I'm concurrently accredited, but in each of these countries we have honorary consuls who are Indian nationals and who stay in close touch with me in handling the local government's engagement, local society and economy's engagement with India under my guidance. And if need be, I can be there very quickly. And overall, knowledge, a smattering knowledge of French and occasionally Arabic gets me some distance. I note that Benin already has an embassy in India, and Chad and Cameroon have decided to open their embassies in India. So, to some extent, the problem would resolve itself.
And finally, say your assignment in Nigeria is done. What impression of the country will you be taking back with you?
That's a philosophical question in a way. I'm not done yet. Having done 3.5 years, I do believe that when I leave, I would probably shake my head and say, I knew more about Nigeria before I started. It's a complex society, it's an evolving society, and it is a bewitching society. It grows on you, and it has.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome back. It's the Watching Diplomatic Channel. Secretary of State for the U.S. state of Missouri, Robin Kennethan, was in Nigeria recently. On the invitation of the U.S. mission in Nigeria for a few days, she was in the country. She paid a visit to INEX headquarters in Abuja and talked to fellow women about their similarities with the United States. We had a brief chat with her when she returned to Lagos on her own journey into politics and the hope she's preaching to women who want to do the same. Good Could you tell us about your present visit to Nigeria?
I'm here in Nigeria this week at the request of the U.S. Embassy to talk about women involved in public service and elective office. You know, last week was International Women's Day, and in the United States we actually celebrate Women's History Month, so we take it for an entire month. And so I'm here talking to folks in Nigeria, both men and women, about how important it is to get more women to participate and be active in public life.
But since we're talking women in politics, way back in 2008, we had U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton running against President Barack Obama. We also had Sarah Palin running as a mate to John McCain during the Republican race. But they still didn't get, to that position that they were aspiring for. Is America ready for a female president, maybe? You think they ever will be ready?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think it's fantastic that we've had very serious candidates for presidential nominations and for vice president as women. No, that's progress for us, and so I certainly hope in my lifetime we have a woman who is president, but it's just going to take more women running and being involved in the process before that happens.
And you'll be talking to women here in Nigeria. Many of them, of course, want to go into politics. What advice do you have for them?
Just keep trying. You know, barriers are breaking down all the time, and in the United States it's taken a long time to get where we are. And in just one generation, from my mother to me, the opportunities have been dramatically different. And so I think what's important is that families focus on educating not just the boys but also the girls, and making sure both of them know that they can live out their dreams and that they're not limited. You know, in the end, Nigeria has these wonderful natural assets that are the envy of so many places of the world, but they have wonderful, natural, talented human assets as well. And what you don't want to do is waste 50% of those. And I was just this morning at a girls' school, the Holy Cross School here in Lagos, and had a fantastic meeting with all kinds of bright young women who I think will be the leaders of tomorrow.
You have a wonderful record in politics in your home state of Missouri. Did you always want to be a politician?
Well, I did actually. I grew up in a family that had lots of history in public service, and so for me it was sort of normal. We sat around the dinner table talking about what we could do to make our communities better, and I was always getting involved in little projects, whether it's figuring out how to build a new swimming pool for our town or helping with the new church. So for me it's about finding something that you love to do that's bigger than yourself, so that the time we have on this earth makes a difference.
Well, America does practice a kind of democracy that is pretty standard around the world. Nigeria also practices democracy. You were here in 2011 to observe the presidential elections and the general elections. We're used to asking what can we learn from your democracy, but what can you learn from our own elections?
Right. You know, one of the things that I learned that was very important was the impact of getting young people involved in the election process. You know, the average age of poll workers in my state is 72, and I am thankful for them. But I'd really also like to get young people involved, and so I loved that Nigeria was focused and relying on the youth, because they're going to be the leaders of tomorrow. The other thing that was fabulous was how they were using text messaging to communicate with all of these students and kids, because things were changing quickly and they needed to adapt, and they were able to get that information out very, very quickly, and that's a model for the rest of the world.
Well, of course, it's still sort of new for us here, women in politics, but how can women move to a place of prominence where even the men support them when they're aiming for these leadership positions?
Well, really it's about both having self-confidence to put yourself out there to run, but also having respect in your communities. And you know, a lot of times we think that you just start out running for president or start out running for the Senate, but the fact is, in the United States at least, a lot of times women start out at the local level. The first woman to be elected in the United States Senate got very involved in her local activities in her neighborhood, and she gained the respect of people in her neighborhood and was, after that, elected to the United States Senate. So I would just encourage women to get involved locally. It makes a big difference for their communities and their families, and through that gain the leadership skills to take it to the next step.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Cameron.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on Diplomatic Channel this week. You can reach us by writing to diplomaticchannel@channelstv.com or join the discussions on Facebook or start one of your own. Just go to facebook.com/Diplomatic Channel. I am Amarachi Ubani. Have a good week.